Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Self Within. My name is Anabel, and we are here to explore the magic, mess, and medicine of coming home to your authentic self. Today, we are going to be diving into the topic of karma and really the meaning of it from a Buddhist perspective. Because let's be honest, much of the information out there on karma is really based on this basic principle that all actions have consequences. It's really about this: if we do good, we get good in return. And if we do bad, we get bad in return. But is that all there is to karma, or is there actually more to it? So here to shed some light on this topic is Kevin Maher, North Zone leader of the Soka Gakkai International USA Buddhist Association. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. I'm thrilled to be on the podcast today.
Well, Kevin, tell me a little bit about your journey with Buddhism. What really drew you to Buddhism in the first place?
Yeah, so my journey with Buddhism began a few years after I finished college. At the time, I was really just trying to make sense of a deep personal loss and figure out how to cope and find meaning in the face of that. And a few years prior, I had lost my mother to a lengthy illness, and really the grief that I carried from that experience slowly turned into deep anxiety and despair. And over time, things worsened. I began experiencing frequent panic attacks and withdrawing from everything, including things I previously enjoyed and from people I liked being around. And in the midst of this struggle, I started actively seeking answers. Initially, I turned to self-help books, philosophy, and anything else that I thought might offer some relief. Eventually, I became interested in exploring Buddhism. It seemed to offer insights into some of these key questions that I was wrestling with about life and death, loss, and the nature of suffering. But much of what I first encountered felt somewhat abstract. Then, when I was about 25, my sister was introduced to the SGI Nichiren Buddhism and the practice of chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo by a coworker. And she shared the practice with me over the course of many weeks. And at first, I wasn't so interested. I wasn't looking for a daily practice, and chanting was not something that was familiar to me. It seemed like a lot of effort, to be honest. And I essentially wanted a shortcut to happiness, a quick fix to ease my suffering. But something seemed to have shifted in her energy, her outlook, her life itself. And that's what finally inspired me to give it a try, or at least learn more. So she gave me the number of a young man who had grown up in the practice, and he was a student in Boston. And so we began meeting regularly, and soon I started attending SGI Buddhist meetings. And incredibly, within just a short period of time of chanting myself and connecting with the SGI Buddhist community, I started to feel something I hadn't in a very long time, which was hope. I couldn't fully explain it, but it was undeniable in how I was feeling. And even though my external circumstances hadn't really changed, something inside me had. I felt lighter, like I actually had some power in my life and circumstances. And that shift made it clear to me there was something deep and real and transformative about this practice and philosophy. And I knew I wanted to keep going with it. And that was 25 years ago.
Wow, that's amazing. I resonated with the piece about the shortcut. A lot of these things that we look up feel cumbersome or lengthy. It's like, how much time am I going to have to dedicate in my day to actually do this practice? Like when I have all my other to-dos that are a part of my life. And oftentimes we tend to put it aside. And I would say I'm guilty of this as well, right? When I start to pick and choose my practices, my rituals, it's like what fits with the schedule versus thinking about it the opposite way. How do you make your schedule fit around the practice that in the long term to your 25 years gets you to this place where you feel whole and grounded and lighter and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's an important point.
Yeah. So let's get into karma because this is something that I really don't even remember at this point when I had this thought or this inspiration to dig into this topic. It sort of came to me, and all of a sudden I went down this rabbit hole of, okay, what is karma? Because I've always understood it as if you do something bad in your life, there are going to be negative consequences that are going to come to you at some point. It's like this surprise. I don't know when, but I've accumulated negative karma now. Or the opposite, if you do good, you're going to get all these positive outcomes. And I was thinking, is there something else? Is that really it? Like all these other thoughts came up. So, from a Buddhist perspective, what does the word actually mean?
Yeah, this is such a deep and thoughtful question. And I'd like to start really just by emphasizing that I'm by no means an expert on the subject and really consider myself a lifelong student. And I'm looking forward to learning together with you today through our dialogue. And my understanding of karma comes directly from my study of the writings of Nichiren Daishonin, who established the teaching of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, and my Buddhist mentor, Daisaku Ikeda. And that being said, karma is a Sanskrit word that literally means action, that
Mm,
specifically are actions of thought, speech, and behavior. And these actions or causes can be likened to seeds planted in the depths of our lives. And that over time, under the right conditions, those seeds sprout as effects, either positive or negative, as you touch on, right? And that each good action that we initiate manifests at some point in the future as a positive effect. And conversely, when we cause harm, examples such as lying, putting others down, disrespecting the dignity of life, we create negative causes that lead to negative effects. And Buddhism teaches that life isn't limited to the here and now. It's a continuous flow that connects the past, present, and the future, and that every action we take becomes part of this ongoing chain of cause and effect, shaping not only our current reality, but also the direction of our future. And that is why each moment holds incredible power. And as you touched on, in the West, karma is sometimes or often perhaps misunderstood as a form of retribution, what goes around comes around sort of idea. But in the practice of Nichiren Buddhism, karma is not fixed or fated. It's dynamic, it's transformable. And while we carry both good and negative karma from countless past actions, we're not powerless in the face of it. And I think that part is critical and can't be repeated enough, that we can transform our karma so that rather than viewing our hardships as punishment, Nichiren Buddhism teaches that even our deepest suffering can become the fuel for happiness and growth. So in that sense, we don't need to look backwards to figure out what causes did I make to get me here. All that matters really is the present moment. And so those of us in the SGI believe by chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which is the core of our Buddhist practice, taking action for the happiness of others, and striving continuously to grow as a human being, we create powerful new causes for the present moment. And Daisaku Ikeda has referred to this process of continual growth as human revolution, which is an inner transformation that leads to actual change in our lives and environment. And so, in other words, we're not bound by the past. We can use every moment to move forward and to create value and build a really joyful, resilient life. And that really becomes the purpose of our Buddhist practice.
mm. So, just quickly before I jump into this other question, because I was focusing in on the transformative piece that you were talking about, but can you explain to me what the meaning is of the actual chant? Does it have a particular translation or what does it mean?
Sure. So at its heart, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, we perceive as a fundamental law of the universe.
Mm,
And it's really a powerful expression of life itself. And the practice was established by Nichiren Daishonin, who was a 13th century Japanese Buddhist reformer who lived at a very tumultuous time in Japan. He studied from a young age the various teachings of Shakyamuni, or the historical Buddha. And after years of study and seeking, he came to a bold realization that the heart and essence of all of the recorded Buddhist teachings was found in the Lotus Sutra, which was taught near the end of Shakyamuni's life, the last 8 years of his life. And the title of that sutra in Japanese phonetics is Myoho Renge Kyo.
mm,
So to Nichiren, that phrase was it was far more than just the name of the sutra. He saw it really as a living breathing principle, a law that lies at the very center of life. It's the core of the teaching. And he added the contraction nam, which means to devote oneself, and introduced this practice of chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. He saw it as, in essence, as each time you say this phrase of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, you are reciting all of the teachings of the Buddha in that one phrase. One way that it's been equated, which I always love this idea, is if you see a close friend and from a distance, and someone mentions that friend, says their name, all of your experiences,
Mm.
all of your interactions, the love, the care, the connection that you feel for that person is invoked in just the name itself. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which we consider as this guiding law of the universe, in the same way. So there's something very powerful in the name, and that is the core essence of our practice of chanting.
Thank you for sharing that. That's so helpful to understanding it. So, going back to the karma piece around transforming it, is it possible to change things, or are we truly stuck with this karma, this buildup? Because I see it as like a buildup, as a layer of good or bad.
Yeah, I think that's a really important statement and question in terms of the idea of transforming karma, right? From a Nichiren Buddhism perspective, karma is not fixed. It's something that we can transform, and it's not an unchangeable destiny.
Mm.
One way to understand it or one way to look at it is by thinking of reoccurring patterns in our own lives. From a relational perspective, perhaps we're drawn to the same kinds of romantic partners, even when we recognize that those relationships aren't healthy. Or perhaps we find ourselves getting into repeated patterns of conflict with family or friends or colleagues. And these patterns can feel overwhelming, as if we're trapped. You were speaking to this idea, right? Leaving us feeling disempowered and at the mercy of our environment or the past. And Buddhism, however, offers a profoundly practical and hopeful perspective that it teaches that these repetitive tendencies are not signs of some personal failure or flaw, but expressions of karma, that they're deep-seated causes that we've made over time. And more importantly, it teaches that we're never powerless in the face of them. And for us in the SGI community, through consistent spiritual practice and supporting others, we can begin to transform even the most entrenched karmic patterns. But this transformation isn't passive. It requires action, and it requires at times courage and ongoing effort. And the struggle, the suffering that we might experience from one particular situation or karma can become a springboard for our own personal growth and a way to help others in similar situations. When we have inner resolve to do that, when we're determined, like, I'm going to break this pattern and become a source of hope and encouragement for others. There's
Mm.
this wonderful passage from Daisaku Ikeda on this point that I go to frequently, where he writes that everything that happens in our lives has meaning. And moreover, the way of life of practitioners of Nichiren Buddhism is to find and discover meaning in all things. And nothing is insignificant. Whatever a person's karma may be, it definitely has profound meaning. And this is not just a matter of outlook. That changing the world starts by changing our fundamental state of mind. And this is a key Buddhist principle, that a powerful determination to transform even negative karma into mission can dramatically transform the real world. By changing our inner state of mind, we can change any suffering or hardship into a source of joy, regarding it as a means for forging and developing our lives. To turn even sorrow into a source of creativity, this is the way of life of practitioners of Nichiren Buddhism.
Mm. I love that you are highlighting this piece of everything has meaning. And that's something that stuck with me actually when I was talking to our mutual friend, Claudia. Uh,
Yes.
he had said something about that to me, and it really shifted something for me. And I remember it was either that day or the day after I had someone stop by the house. We were getting some work done. And in that moment, I thought, okay, this person and I share some karma. I've never met them before. They're probably never going to come back again. They're here for 5 minutes at most. What can I do, or how can I also change how I interact with them? Whether it's like a different type of hello. I remember like offering them a drink of water because it was so hot outside, right?
Sure.
But it was like that tiny little shift for me that I think if I hadn't had that conversation before, I probably wouldn't have treated that person the same way. And not because I wanted to be mean or ignore them or anything like that, but it just helped me become just more aware of little actions can have a deeper meaning for them, but also for myself. And it's a cycle that can keep going round and around. So I really have to say that I just walk by people on the street or I see them in like random in the parking lot and I'm like, yep, we exchange looks. There's something there.
That's such a great point. I think there's a couple things that you touched on that I really wanted to respond to and appreciate. One is I think sometimes we think of a dramatic inner change as something that happens overnight, that we somehow we wake up and we suddenly realize, we're going to completely abandon a way that we've been living or engaging with the world and be a completely new person. But I think more often than not, what I understand as human revolution is an accumulation of those small acts
Mm.
and the buildup of those small acts, taking that first courageous step to interact with a person that maybe normally you wouldn't do or interacting in a different way. And I feel that then gives us the confidence to take the next step and the next step and the next step. And then when we go back on our journey, it may feel like overnight, oh wow, things shifted overnight. But the reality is, I do feel like it's that accumulation of effort to really change patterns. And when we recognize that, then to appreciate those small efforts that we make rather than just sort of like, okay, I wasn't able to do anything today, so I give up, right? And that's disempowering. What's more empowering is I challenge this one aspect that I've really struggled with for some time and celebrate that and then take the next step. I think for me, it's a value creative or poetic way of living.
Mm. And all of that contributes to your karma. Is that right?
For sure. I mean, if we look at karma, meaning action or
Right.
causes, like the causes that we're making in our thoughts, our words, and our actions themselves, like each day, how can I make better causes so that I am able to perceive things not from my smaller self, which can be ego driven, but from a larger, more expansive self, that I have greater empathy and compassion for others. And then the causes that I'm making, the karma that I'm transforming in that moment is the accumulation of those causes. And it makes us feel joyful in a practical way. If you think about maybe times in your life, this definitely applies to me, where find myself in a spirit of complaint,
Mm.
where I'm just begrudging this project or this work situation or this relationship thing. And every person I meet, I want to offload. And I apologize to all those people in my life where you want to offload that complaint.
Oh, yeah.
You physically feel it, right? You physically feel that that's a cause, it's a negative cause that we're making is to go around and complain and begrudge. And the effect is oftentimes the way that we feel versus when we make an effort to talk to someone that maybe we feel like, oh, that person's standoffish and doesn't want to talk to me, but I'm going to make the effort anyways. How good it feels to make that effort to connect with that person. That's a positive cause, and we feel the effect almost immediately in that case, where we feel better. I firmly believe like focusing on the accumulation of those positive causes is something to celebrate and to put into practice.
Mm.
So, Kevin, if our present day karma includes our actions from past lives or even just the recent past, what does this say about our family and the karma that we have with them, or even the karma that we have with really close relationships?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question. This is I think a really important one that I'm sure will resonate with all the listeners as they're thinking about karma and family karma. Karma that we have with close loved ones can feel at times the most painful, could feel the most entrenched. But when we look closely at our own family experiences, we may begin to notice reoccurring patterns of loss, of distance,
Hmm.
of health issues, of financial struggles, sort of threads that seem to weave throughout these relationships and maybe even throughout generations. We may notice this within a family, of course. And these are all, from Buddhist lens, all expressions of karma, the unfolding of causes and conditions over time. And I certainly see these dimensions in my own family. And before I began Buddhist practice and my study of Buddhism, I could often struggle to make sense of these patterns or dimensions. And the weight of it could feel heavy and even unfair, as if I were trapped in a situation
Hmm.
that I hadn't chosen for myself in the first place, right? But
Yeah.
through my study of Buddhism and Buddhist practice, I've come to understand that these experiences not as burdens, but really as opportunities for insight and compassion and to transform your suffering into empathy and into joy. And the changes are not always immediate, but I've really come to firmly believe deeply in the possibility of transformation, both for myself and for my family. And this importantly includes the family that we're not born into. You talked about other people that we're close to, other relationships,
Hmm. Yeah.
lives, and that we can create these really powerful relationships that also feel karmic. You know, we meet someone and it feels like we've known them for a very long time, even though we just recently meet them, we feel this deep connection to a person. From Buddhism, that's karma.
Hmm.
And you know, again, from a Buddhist perspective, we have deep karmic connections with the people that we're close to, and that could be either positive or challenging. And the fact that we're born into a particular family is not random. We believe it's a result of shared or interconnected karma from the remote past. And this
Hmm.
can not always be easy to embrace, especially if we find ourselves in families that are not harmonious or there can be real discord. But importantly, SGI Nichiren Buddhism teaches that while we may have karmic tendencies from the past, we're never bound by them. That Buddhism emphasizes transforming karma by chanting and taking action based on our inherent wisdom, our courage, and compassion. We can not only transform our own karmic tendencies, but also positively influence our family dynamics and relationships. And Buddhism teaches that our family relationships can be some of the most difficult, but also the most meaningful, that they
Hmm.
can offer profound opportunities for personal growth, reflection, and inner transformation. And that ultimately, in Buddhism's view of family karma, is one that is of profound hope and empowerment. So no matter what our karmic starting point may be, we have the power to transform our situation and that of our families and our loved ones. And this is an ongoing process of our own inner growth. And ultimately, the purpose of our life is one of continual growth in relation with
Right.
others.
So I really am seeing it as lessons, right? Even though the word karma means action, when I really reflect on what you were just saying, to me, they feel like they're lessons that in one way or another we've chosen for ourselves. If we're born into it, and maybe not everyone might agree with what I'm going to say, but at least my belief is that we've chosen our family, right? Our soul chose our family for a reason. And again, that kind of goes back to the lesson, whatever the lesson is. If we were struggling with being heard or we had some other challenging childhood situation, I think as we mature and many of us go through our own journeys of self-discovery, we figure out like, okay, there was something there that brought me to wherever I am today. And yes, it was challenging, but I've survived it. And then in what you were saying too, with the families that we choose or the relationships that we choose for ourselves, again, we're attracted to, it sounds like, these lessons that maybe we haven't yet mastered, we haven't learned them yet. And so we're still sort of in the same loop until we either snap out of it or something happens that we figure out what the lesson is and we can lean into it. To me, that's what this sounds like. Is that accurate or?
Yeah, I think that's a really more powerful way of looking at it. That yes, through these dynamics, through these relationships, we are certainly learning a lot. We're learning a lot about ourselves. We're learning about ourselves in relation with others. Even from one standpoint, we can learn about how we choose not to be in the world, right? So we may
Mm,
have someone in our
right.
environment who treats others very unfairly, treats people rudely or with disrespect. And through that engagement, that karmic connection with that person, we learn that we will never be that way, that we'll treat others with greater compassion and greater empathy. So there's a really profound aspect of our outlook and how we choose to perceive a situation. And what is the lesson for us? Is the
Mm,
lesson just the suffering? Because, of course, and that's understandable. There are relationships that are very painful, very challenging. And that may be a lesson, but is that the sole lesson, or is the lesson
mm,
about how we are going to be in this world? And I certainly, when I look back at my own experiences, both with family and with friendships, people that I felt this really strong bond to, where maybe there's been an element of trust broken, or I felt like really disrespected by another person. When I've been able to lean into my Buddhist practice, the lesson that comes from it is not just the suffering aspect, but how am I going to choose to be? In one sense, it's easy to kind of say that, but when I'm actually facing it in my own life, am I able to, again, lean into those more value creating aspects of the lesson learning? And I do that in solidarity with others. There may be times where I feel like I'm throwing up my hands and I don't know what more I can do in this
mm.
relationship. But through the encouragement and care of others around me, I can be reminded that there can be a powerful lesson from this experience. And for me, the momentum for it to become the most powerful comes with this decision that I'm going to be a person of greater empathy and care so I can
Yeah.
share that with others as well.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I was thinking about the storylines that you see so often in movies, right? Like the character arc and how it's developed. And the most beautiful stories are the ones of, a character that starts at point A, and over the course of the movie, they are a totally shifted and transformed person. And so many of us understand that because we can see ourselves in that. Or maybe we're somewhere in the middle where we're in that transitional phase, or I've had that experience. And so I love that. To me, that really marries a lot of what we've been talking about with transforming how we can make karma our mission, how it's not fixed, but it's fluid and it's flexible. And it's really up to us to determine how we want our karma to show up. I mean, this conversation is giving me so much hope about
Mm.
karma.
Karma and mission are two sides of the same coin,
Mm.
that our deepest suffering can become the driving force for personal growth and a source of hope for others. And so for me, like the question is always, how can I transform the poison of this suffering into the medicine of joy? And for me, this was a revolutionary idea when I encountered it early in my Buddhist practice, as I tried to make sense of my mother's illness and passing. What once felt like senseless suffering began to take on a much deeper meaning through the lens of Buddhism. That her loss taught me to not take anything or anyone for granted. It also opened my heart in a new way, giving me real lived empathy for others going through their own loss. And in addition, it sparked a deep personal commitment or vow to become truly happy as the greatest expression of gratitude and honor to my mother's life. And I repeatedly have had experiences throughout my Buddhist practice of taking this to heart, of changing karma into mission. And it's something that I feel provides a whole new lens for which I can view my struggles or negative karma.
Yeah, I have also seen that so often our biggest challenges end up becoming the thing that we do in some capacity, whether it's teaching others how to go through that same exact pain, the fact that we went through it, that we experienced it, that we understand, we have empathy, as you said, we now have this wisdom, or we might be 10 steps ahead of the person that we are offering support to or comfort to. And as a Reiki practitioner myself, I always think, okay, the universe has brought this person to me because they are experiencing at this point in time something that I went through. And I remember one of my teachers saying that you end up drawing the people to you that have some type of a shared experience. And that's why you're helping them through that. So I totally see that as well.
Yeah, I love that. Our lives are deeply connected in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. In the SGI, we frequently say there are no coincidences because of this underlying mystic law. It connects us in deep ways. We find ourselves in situations where we meet someone on the bus or on a walk, and then we find like just this immediate connection to and attraction or just connection to this person. And those things are not random.
Yeah, it also makes me think of that saying, people come into your life for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. And I had that conversation with my daughter recently because she was reminiscing about this friend that she made, and she's very social, so she's really good at making friends pretty quickly. And she's like, "Oh, I really miss that friend that I made one time." And I thought, okay, she's probably never going to see this person again. Like maybe she might run into her, but we don't live close by. They don't go to the same school.
Sure.
And I was trying to explain to her this idea of season, reason, a lifetime. And I think as we're talking about karma, that's also coming up for me, right? Because that little interaction that she had with this person, it brightened her day. They had such a fun time together. They played, they connected, they held hands, and that was it, right? They shared this karma together where they brought some joy for each other, even though it was short lived. Like that experience in and of itself spoke volumes. She still remembers it. Like it still brings her this like good feeling when she thinks about that. And even touching upon what you were saying with not taking people for granted, right? If people are only there for a season, make the most of that season, right? Make the most of every single interaction, no matter if it's the person at the deli counter or if it's your coworker that you're going to see every single day.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think if we lived with that kind of intention, that every person we encounter, it could be the first and last time we ever see them, that would completely transform the nature of our relationships. And it would fill us with such an appreciation for even those brief encounters that can be life-changing. We do have those moments where we meet someone that just seems to pop out of the earth and share some wisdom or an experience that speaks directly to what we're going through in that moment, and that you give us a chills like, how did that person seem to know what I needed to hear in that moment? Mr. Ikeda often talked about treasuring the person right in front of you, and that when you treasure another, it brings joy to your life and it brings joy to their life. And how many times do we take family or friends or coworkers for granted? And unfortunately, I know many of us have had those experiences of, oh, I didn't tell this person how much they meant to me while they were here. And then we have that regret when they're not. And so to live with that intention of, I want others to know how I feel about it. I don't want to have to wait until their birthday or holiday or they're in hospice, but for them to know how I care. And it doesn't always mean saying I love you every day. It comes through how we show up and how we seem attentive when they're speaking to us. That also is a powerful cause for our own happiness. Because again, our joy is interrelated with the joy of others. When we make that effort to care for another person, to show that we care and give that compassion, it comes back to us. We need more of that, especially now.
Definitely. I was thinking a little bit about timing, and I wanted to touch upon that as well, especially when I think about a past life. So, I guess, how does timing come into play or show up when it comes to karma?
Yeah, we spoke a little bit earlier about these three existences of past, present, and future. And so the effects of causes that were made in the past, they may appear in any of those time frames. And for me, the key aspect is always focusing on the present moment and the action, the steps that we take, the causes that we make in the present moment, it impacts the future for sure.
Mm.
But we don't have to live in the future. If we live in the future, then we can make causes that are careless and not really grounded in the present moment. And at the same point, while we can learn from the past, if we get stuck in the past, we're also not living in the present moment. From a Buddhist lens, the key aspect is always focused on the here and now and what can I do in the here and now. And then we continue to make good and strong and positive causes, then positive effects emerge. And when effects emerge that maybe are not welcomed or not positive, we can also, one, we can transform them and we can create meaning from them. The name of the organization, Soka Gakkai International, means the society. It's a Japanese neologism, which translates to the Society for Value Creation. Value means the capacity to find meaning and contribute to the well-being of others under any circumstances. That's the way that Mr. Ikeda defines value creation, that we can create meaning with anything that happens in our lives. That for me is incredibly empowering. So rather than being focused on the past and what causes did I make to land in this situation right now, when we see something in our environment or in our life that is undesirable, we can look at it from the perspective of how can I learn from this and grow from this and transform the suffering of it. That for me is a life of value creation, which is ultimately the path to happiness. Happiness is not the destination, but it's a journey. For us, it's a journey of forever creating more and more value in the present moment. And when we do that, it's really incredible. When we live with that kind of intention in the present moment, it can transform the way we perceive the past and the lessons that we learn from others as well. An example from early in my Buddhist practice, it was still at that point really trying to make sense of the family karma that I experienced with the loss of
Mm.
my mother and sort of the despair that I was feeling about my life and the world. It was very, very early in the practice. And I was invited to go visit a young man who had grown up in our Buddhist community who was in his 20s and he was battling a very rare form of cancer. And he was in the
Mm.
hospital. In fact, the first time I met him was right before he was in the hospital. And I remember seeing him walking with a cane and thinking, he's quite young to be walking with a cane. And I learned that he was dealing with this incurable form of cancer. And I remember going to visit him in the hospital, on the way to the hospital, thinking, we're going to visit this young man to encourage him. And I don't know what to say. I feel inept. I don't know what to say to encourage this person. But when we got there, it was the complete opposite. We got to his room. He learned that I was brand new in my journey, in my Buddhist practice. And he spent this entire time sharing words of encouragement to me. He seemed so hopeful, so
Wow.
full of life, so encouraging. And at one point, myself and my friend who visited him were asked to go into the waiting room because they had to do some additional testing. The nurse came in. And while we were out in the hallway, one of the other nurses came by and I said, well, he seems like he's doing really well. And she shared, no, he's in incredible pain,
Mm.
but he knew that his friends were coming. And whenever anyone comes to visit him, he puts on this face of real beauty and care because he wants to encourage other people and not for them not to see how
Oh.
much he's suffering. And the impact of that on me was profound. I'm
Mm.
talking with you about this. This was 20, more than 25 years ago that this person who's living with this sense of karma into
Mm.
mission, that became his mission, his full focus in the remaining months of his life. He passed away a few months after that, was to live a life, a contributive life where he was encouraging other people. And that's a profound way of looking at the world. And it touched me so deeply, that
Right.
act, and just see a person whose life was really shining brightly. That's the impact of when our karma shifts. When
Mm.
we're able to do this deep inner reformation in our own lives, the way that it can touch another person's life to awaken to their own potential to do the same is deeply profound. So, in one sense, you could look at it, this young man is someone who's suffering with the karma of illness, but he did not let that define him. What became his defining moment is a person of encouragement, and which is entirely what he was. And I think he's someone that I think of almost every day because
Mm.
he showed really the brilliance and the beauty of human beings. That when we live with this sense of, I want to connect with others authentically and encourage others authentically, something comes out of our life that may surprise us.
Yeah. Yeah. It also makes me think of, I love that you brought up that example of this person with cancer or some sort of deadly diagnosis or disease. And it's tough when you think about children, right? Children that are now diagnosed with some type of a disease that sometimes comes out of completely nowhere. It's not even genetic, and you think about them, right? And this is where it gets hard to really fathom why. Why does this show up for this specific person? And of course, the parents can't even understand. I'm sure parents, if they could trade places with their child, I'm sure hands down most of them would. But yeah, that's I think where it gets tough, right? When you start to think about those situations where people are completely helpless in whatever is going on for them.
Yeah, I have two young children, 14 and 10 years old, and they bring such joy to my life and such meaning. And they're incredible teachers. I learn from them. I learn about my
Yeah.
own karmic tendencies in relation with
Oh
them.
yeah, don't
So,
we all?
I'm always grateful. Sometimes they're not the lessons I want to learn, but the lessons I need to learn. And I feel such a privilege to be their parent in this lifetime. And perhaps it was the reverse
Mm,
at some other point. But yes, that reality of life and death and the preciousness of our life and recognizing how to make sense of when we see a young person whose life is lost. I've not had that experience, so I can't
mm,
speak to the profound sense of loss and grief. But friends in our SGI community that have had that experience, what has been incredibly inspiring to me is Buddhism's non-dualistic. So you can hold both grief and joy
mm,
simultaneously. So everyone will experience deep grief, especially over the loss of a child. But when we look at karma intermission, when we
right.
resolve in the depths of our being that I'm going to live the happiest life, the most fulfilling life in tribute to my child or
Mm,
to tribute to this person, this loved one that's been lost, that is my debt of gratitude that I'm going to repay to them by living the most compassionate life and trying to care for others and grow as a human being. For me, it impacts the way that we can perceive that situation and that
mm,
we can find meaning even in great loss. But I think it definitely requires a lot of support. And again, a massive, massive loss that I can't even
yeah,
fathom. But to be able to take from that lesson of how I'm going
right.
to live, I think is very meaningful and profound.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I know we've talked a lot about positive and negative karma. Is there any other type of karma that maybe we're not touching upon or something else that's out there?
Yeah, thank you. This is a great question. I think there's several important dimensions of karma that really come into life in how we relate to ourselves, to others, in the world around us. And it really shows up in choices, our habits, our relationships, as we've just been discussing, even in how we respond to challenges or moments of joy. So it's not just about belief, it's about our engagement with the
Mm,
world. And I would say maybe touching on a few additional aspects of karma. One is collective karma. This is something we talked about earlier when
right.
we think about family, right? Or our communities. We could look
Mm,
at the nations or even all of humanity, sort of that collective karma is one aspect. And what that means concretely is that people living in the same community or same time period, whether that's our local neighborhood or an entire country, can face similar challenges or patterns. And when that happens, we can understand that it really is an expression of collective karma. That's one
mm,
aspect. And a clear example of this is when a group or society maybe clings to harmful beliefs, and that shared mindset can lead to a shared outcome of a collective karma shaped by those views.
mm,
Of course, from a Buddhist perspective, even in the face of these collective patterns, the path to real change begins with the individual. It's always focused on when an individual transforms, that has a ripple effect in one's environment and society, and it always begins with the individual.
mm,
And that awakening, that person's inner transformation can become the catalyst for broader societal change. And so when one person begins to realize the power that they have to transform their suffering into wisdom, they naturally start to influence their environment. We see this in social movements all over the world, that it starts with ordinary individual human beings, and that impacts collective change that has a ripple effect. And over time, those ripples can lead to a real transformation in our families, communities, and even in the direction of society. So while karma is collective, it always starts with the individual. And that
mm,
for me is deeply empowering. So if someone finds themselves in a family or in a community where there's real discord or disharmony, that by focusing on ourselves, what can I do? Because I cannot change necessarily the person in front of me, but I can vow to transform my own life. That does have a ripple effect externally. And another aspect of karma is deep-rooted patterns. So something we might think of as the karmic tendencies.
Mm,
This can be deep fear, self-doubt, anger, like addiction that have really formed over decades or maybe even lifetimes. And this can be described again as the karma of tendencies. And as we've discussed, our thoughts, our feelings, our habits are those are all aspects of karma. And that's why for us in the Shai Buddhist community, the human revolution, this idea of the inner transformation of an individual, is so central. It's about changing our inner lives at the deepest level that keep us from repeating sort of these karmic tendencies. And then a final point that I'll touch on, this is a much bigger concept and one that I find incredibly empowering and shifting, is an aspect of karma that's mission-based karma. This is the idea that some karma is chosen voluntarily. You touched upon this a little bit earlier, that it's not punishment, but as mission. And this powerful idea comes directly from the Lotus Sutra, where bodhisattvas in the Lotus Sutra, out of their immense compassion, choose to be born into difficult circumstances, difficult times, to help others find happiness through their own inner transformation. And this
mm,
really aligns closely with the idea of transforming karma into mission. For example, someone born into a particular hardship may awaken to a life of purpose, of helping others to transcend similar circumstances when we live with that sense of mission. So instead of asking, why me in a particular circumstance, we start to see our challenges really as opportunities to connect with and encourage others. And Daisaku Ikeda often emphasized that the real proof of Buddhism's power isn't in a life free of problems, but in a life that's never swayed by them, right?
mm.
So that we can use our struggles to inspire hope and lead others and support others that we're actively creating a life of unshakable happiness. And not just for ourselves, but for the world around us. And so that really shifts the way that we perceive our karma into destiny, into the sense of mission that I'm going to encourage others. And I think back to the experience of my sister who introduced me to Buddhism and for seeing the transformation in her life. We experienced the same karmic suffering of our
Right.
mother, and to see her living with this sense of agency and joy, in that the only thing that had really changed in her life was practicing Buddhism.
Mm,
And that for me gave me this sense of like, wow, if she can do it, then I certainly can as well. I can certainly really transform my suffering.
mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. So earlier we talked a little bit about karma isn't just like the physical action, it could also be a thought that comes up. So let's say if I were to just think something negatively or positively, is that enough to call it karma, or do you need something else to complete the full circle?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think from Nichiren Buddhist perspective, a positive mindset is certainly important. That true karmic transformation means taking action on behalf of others, making causes for the happiness of others, and facing our lives with courage. We really start to see a shift in our karma. And I was thinking of this question a bit and my own experiences, those patterns in my own life, and some of the examples or signs that, okay, there's been some shift. Maybe it's completely fixed, but some of those elements or signs to me are when we no longer react to some of the same triggers with the same response. Again, we start responding with greater wisdom and compassion, even in difficult situations. So when we start to see a different response, in addition, we create new positive causes that kind of outweigh the past negative ones. That to me is another clear sign that there's been a shift. And when we shift our state of life from one of suffering, a reaction to our environment, to a higher life condition that is able to respond creatively to situations and not feel again like this is defining me, but how am I able to grow from this situation? And sometimes it's not always easy to see a kind of shift in patterns. Nichiren Daishonin, I'm paraphrasing and not paraphrasing well, but he has this quote like, even though they're so close to our face, we cannot see our eyelashes.
Oh, yeah.
In the same way, it's difficult sometimes to see our Buddha nature or to see the inner transformation that we've undergone, which is why connecting with others, encouraging others is so important because as we're sharing with others, we're reminding ourselves of, oh, yes, that pattern actually shifted in my life. For us, the keys are, again, to really face with courage our challenges and with the determination to transform them, and then taking action and then persevering though in those moments where it feels difficult, especially when something comes up again, where I feel like I've really had a shift and now I'm finding myself in a similar dynamic, using those difficulties, those moments as fuel for our own inner transformation. So again, while positive thinking is certainly important, helpful, for us, it's doing that deep dive in terms of our inner transformation or human revolution is really what truly changes our karma.
I think what you're talking about here is like clearing your karma in a way, right? Like, how do
Mhm.
we, by taking action, by taking positive action, and also by being aware of the shifts that you've had over years, over months, whatever the time is, you can begin to understand and see your evolution, as you've been saying. But it made me think of a ton of these videos that are on YouTube, for example. It's like clear negative karma. Watch this thing for 30 days and clear negative karma. And that's kind of where I started, right? I was like, oh, how do I clear my negative karma? I carry some, we all do. I know I've
Mm,
done my fair share of stuff. So I looked online, and of course, there was this like meditation that I was really attracted to. And it was like, do this every day for 30 days. You're going to clear your negative karma, right? It feels like this magical spell. Like, I
sure.
don't have to do anything. All I have to do is put my headphones on, tune in, and ta-da, in like 30 days, I'm going to be all clear and good to go. And I think what I'm reflecting on here is, okay, that might work, just like the chanting works because it gets you into a state of calm, you're in a relaxed place. With all this noise that we have going on in our heads, it's so hard to literally see, as you said, our eyelashes, like to see
Yes.
what's right in front of us. So there's an element of like, sure, if I'm listening to this meditation for 30 days, I'm probably going to be in a much more aware state where I can make decisions from a place of calm versus responding versus reacting versus stress, etc. But the second part to that, which I don't think is necessarily reflected in these meditations, is and you have to take action, right? Whatever you're trying to shift needs to have legs, and without that, to me, it feels like your negative karma won't truly be erased or shifted or evolved.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, and I also recognize again the lesson learning aspect of it too is how do I live a life of meaning? How do I live a life of value creation? And that often actually we learn the greatest lessons from the most difficult karma.
Mm,
We can really change our lives at the deepest level when we are engaging with a very painful relationship. So rather than just trying to get rid of it,
mm,
I haven't listened to some of those videos in terms of clearing karma, but from what I'm hearing, rather than just trying to eliminate the negative karma, how can I use everything in my life to live a life of greater value and meaning? And I think of that all of the time in the course of my Buddhist practice, situations that I've been in that when they immediately surfaced, my initial response was not like, oh, great. Like that I have this challenge that it seems intractable or this relationship that seems very painful. I'm not always embracing it at first,
yeah.
but through Buddhist practice and through supporting others, I start to see like there's real meaning in this. And this challenge is actually helping me grow to become a better version of myself, to be a more compassionate
Mm,
partner and father. Without those challenges, I would not do the growth that I'm doing. So rather than eliminating them, how can I utilize them? Again, looking at the image of the lotus, without the mud, there's no beautiful lotus.
mm,
Without those challenges, without the negative karma, we cannot be the versions of ourselves that we're striving to be. And that's a slight sort of shift on that perspective of clearing the karma. It's
mm,
how do I use it to do my own human revolution.
Yeah, it's so easy to want to clear. I mean, that's the
Of
shortcut.
course.
We talked about shortcut earlier, right? That's
Yeah,
the shortcut. Let me listen to this for 30 days and it's
sure.
going to be cleared versus really sitting with the act, our transgression, whatever it is that we did, and just sitting with it. And there's so much about sitting in the pain, going through it, the more we resist, the more it persists, right? There's so many of these phrases that come up very often. And I think that's essentially what we're talking about. And I also think of like, let's not make ourselves a victim here, or how do we work through the karma to understand it versus taking the easy way out, which is I won't think about it. And by doing this 30-day thing, I'm going to be free and cleared, and now I can walk around and continue living my life, which, to your point, the pattern may show up again, and then you're going to be faced with the same exact thing, and you may make the wrong choice again, right? Right.
Yeah,
So we're back in the
totally.
same loop here.
Totally. And in a sense, it really does require risk and courage to really face those aspects of our lives that are difficult or challenging. Relationships, our own inner voice that self-slanders and is filled with doubt and negativity. It takes tremendous risk. So it's understandable that a person might not be ready at this moment to take that first journey. A scholar friend that I was recently doing some work with, and he was talking about that courage is the combination of vulnerability and risk. And so to
Mm.
live a life of real courage, to really put ourselves out there, to have that vulnerability and to take risk can be scary. And so on one hand, I understand the temptation to want to kind of avoid that or find a
Yeah.
shortcut. Again, I came into Buddhism really wanting a shortcut to happiness, but it does take courage. It does take risk to face those aspects of our lives. To do that in community, I think reduces that set of risk.
Mm.
And to have a tool for me, chanting in a sense is a tool to bring out those inherent qualities of courage gives me the confidence that I can tackle it. And then having those experiences in our life that reaffirm for us, okay, I have faced this challenging dynamic in the past and it wasn't easy, but I was able to get through it. And getting through it, that journey is where happiness is. It's not the end of it.
Right. Right. So the other day, my two kids, they're always fighting with each other. I mean, they're at that age where they're
Sure.
like teasing each other and I don't know, but I always find myself as the middle man. And the other day my youngest was like, "Oh, Emery did that to me." And my oldest was like, "No, I didn't. I thought about doing it, but I didn't actually do it." Right? And so when she said that to me, I said something like the thought is just as important, even though you may not have done the full action. And so I wanted to ask you, when we have negative thoughts about it could be someone that rubbed us the wrong way on the street or whatever it
Sure.
is, and is that enough to create the buildup of negative karma, or is it truly the thought followed by the action, followed by, I don't know, something else that then solidifies this negative karma now in our being?
I've been thinking about this one quite a bit too, and I appreciate the experience you shared of your children. I initially had one thought to respond, but what you shared sparked another idea for me. And this came up during the 2020-21 period when we are all in our homes, very
Yeah.
difficult time period, of course. And my wife and I were both working at that point. I think my oldest daughter was 9, my youngest daughter was 5, and being home working remote with two young children
Mm.
was, and then trying to keep them on virtual schools was very, very challenging. And even though I practice Buddhism and chant and try to have positive thoughts and actions,
Yeah.
what was coming out of me at times was kind of the opposite. And there was this tension or dynamic, especially with my youngest daughter. We would put her on the Zoom. I would leave the room, and 4 minutes later, we would find her like just scrolling on YouTube or whatnot.
Mm.
She was intentionally sort of instigating with her sister, both with her words and her actions, and perhaps with her thoughts too. It wasn't an environment that was really joyful at times, and I found myself anticipating her actions. I would get tense and expect something to happen and ready to jump in almost as a referee. And
Mm.
we were all experiencing a lot of tension, but this it heightened the intention, sort of living this way and me having this expectation or anticipation of how my daughter was going to be. At one point, we were walking in the woods, and this was weeks of being sequestered together. We were walking through the woods, and my daughter said, "Daddy, you seem angry a lot, and
Mm.
that makes me sad." And that was like a knife through my heart, just hearing
Mm.
my youngest daughter think that. And then I didn't feel I had the bandwidth to explain to a 5-year-old why I was anticipating her actions. And I tried my best, and I was like, well,
Right.
it's very difficult, etc. But all she saw was my behavior,
Mm.
right? All she saw were my words. And so it got me to reflect quite a bit. I was chanting a lot to bring out my inner Buddha nature and to really feel compassion and see the potential in her life. And it wasn't always easy. And this went on for a little bit. But then at one point, something really shifted in my life. And I started to see the connection between my thoughts. Like, okay, I'm anticipating how she's going to be,
Mm.
and I'm going to say it. But even in my body language, you could feel like, okay, daddy's getting frustrated. And of course, there were
Right.
quote unquote great reasons. I was afraid she was going to harm her sister or harm herself or burn down the house while I'm on a Zoom call. But none of that really mattered to this 5-year-old. All she saw was daddy getting angry, right?
Mm.
But as I started to chant, I started to see like this is a young person she is looking to connect with her sister. She doesn't understand why she has to be on a computer with a class that is remote. And why are mommy and daddy busy with their work? Why can't they spend time with me? I started to really put myself in her shoes and
Mm.
have greater empathy for her. And it really changed the way that we were interacting. For me, it started with the cause of chanting, which led to how I was perceiving the situation, looking at the situation, which really impacted. I could feel a difference in my body language, just the way that we were interacting. And then something shifted where I was like, okay, I have a 10-minute break. Let me find my daughter and play with her. Let's do something together. Let's go on a walk. Let's ride bikes. I was thinking all of the time. There was a shift
Yeah.
in my thinking from trying to focus on her behavior to one of like, how can I connect more authentically with my daughter? And then fast forward, another walk in the woods. For some reason she feels like she wants to open up to me in the woods, which is lovely. And maybe I need to spend more time in the woods with my child. That's maybe a takeaway from this experience. But we were in the woods again. And then she said to me, and it still gives me goosebumps. She said, Daddy, you seem happier, and that makes me happy. And I
Oh.
thought, like, it melted my heart. It still makes me tear up. And that for me is just again thinking about a
Mm.
real shift in that tendency or that karma between us. And it wasn't, I didn't leave it to her. I wasn't going to be like, okay, this 5-year-old needs to behave differently. I took personal responsibility. This is my karma. I'm going to somehow shift it. And that was a real tangible, practical shift in this dynamic between us and something that I go back to. I continue to go back to. She's now 10 and we have those moments, but I can go back to that experience and see concrete, actual proof of this shift
Mm.
in karma, which again, seeing the connection between the cause of my chanting, the shift in my thoughts, the shift in my behavior, including my words and my body language, and then a shift in this dynamic between us. And that gives me great hope. And going back to our conversation from a few moments ago, it's like, wow, I see deep meaning. We had to go through that experience so I could grow as a father, as a parent. Like I really feel like I feel a sense of gratitude now for having had that experience and learning from this precious 5-year-old child.
Right. And so there's something that you said about your thought and the anticipation of it also caused you already to start to physically feel tension, the expectation, how you might respond, right? There was already things that were starting to happen in your body and your mind, even though they may not have physically manifested yet. And so that to me is super interesting because when I think about, again, sort of how do we create negative karma, right? Is the thought enough? And I think yes and no. It could be a no if we're thinking, okay, you have the thought, and nothing really manifests out of it. But more often than not, it sounds to me that the thought is enough, especially if it's a strong enough thought that maybe has come up consistently over and over again, that now the thought can so easily transform into our body and go into our body, where now we start to feel it. We feel it in our chest. Then the chest then causes us to react in some way, whether it's yelling or whatever it is. And so, yeah, the thought can be enough, especially if it's strong enough, that can cause the action that can lead then to the negative karma. And so that could be maybe a way for me to tell my daughter, like, not to act poorly with her sister. But it just makes me think of it that way, right? All of our thoughts, I think our mind is so powerful, and we can use our mind to transform so many things that can also bring us into our darkest places.
Yeah, I agree. And I thought we can challenge those thought patterns. So maybe we're a person who doesn't immediately embrace difficulty. That certainly is often the case for me. Trying to practice gratitude and appreciation and a different perspective on those thoughts, I think is a great cause. Another
Mm,
cause we can make is I want to complain about my thoughts,
yeah.
about how this happened, and when we physically feel that. We are, as human beings, in Buddhism, we often talk about we communicate really with our life force,
Mm,
maybe more so than with our words. If you see someone, perhaps you work with someone who you say was very cheerful and says good morning, and the person responds like good morning and looks down and seems angry in their body, you want to avoid that kind of person, right?
mm,
In the same sense, maybe you see a person who just smiles. They don't even say anything, but just by their smile, they're communicating their love and compassion. And you feel like, I want to be around that kind of person. I think that there's something really deep to what you're sharing in terms of our thoughts. How do they manifest in our words and in our action is one way of looking at it too. That sometimes it can start with our thoughts, which might be pessimistic or negative or
mm,
cynical. And but what the choice is, how do we then act on it? And from my experience with my daughter was it definitely started with my words like, uh-oh, I heard a noise. What is she doing?
mm,
And that led to yelling her name out. What are you doing? And she could feel that tension from me. But when I shifted my thoughts to, uh-oh, what is she doing? Does she need help? Is
mm,
she okay? Is she looking for more attention? That was a cause I was making, a discipline with my thoughts. And then the behavior was curiosity rather than pessimism or expecting the worst. And I do feel like we can shift that direction of our thoughts and really try to practice appreciation. That is a powerful cause for shifting our thoughts. How do I really embrace this as an opportunity and something that I can learn from? That really, I think, shifts the direction of the thoughts and the words into the action that I'm going to take.
So, Kevin, are there any resources or anything that you want to leave our listeners with when it comes to thinking about karma or Buddhism or anything else that you'd like to share?
In terms of resources, there's a podcast called Buddhability that SGI USA hosts, and it's a wonderful resource of practitioners sharing their own journeys with practicing Buddhism and so many different themes or topics that emerge and how they use Buddhism as a source for finding hope, creating value, transforming their lives at the deepest levels. And so that's one great resource. There's a lot in terms of karma on the Soka Gakkai website and the SGI USA website. It talks about transforming karma and different principles, different aspects of karma. And then when I started my own journey as well, I read a lot. So I read the writings of Daisaku Ikeda. He's written a number of books about both the history of Buddhism, talking about some of these principles that we've been discussing today, but then also in the significance of what chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo means, and then just lots of encouragement. So I think sometimes we can feel overwhelmed in the box of our own suffering, our own karma. We can feel like, okay, so and so is got their own life and they don't understand. And that's often a reason to feel isolated and alone. And for me, like having words of encouragement that remind us of our own inner power, our own inner potential are key. And having friends that can offer that encouragement as well is great. One book that I was diving into in preparation for today, there's a book called Unlocking the Mysteries of Birth and Death, a Buddhist View on Life by Mr. Ikeda. And this talks about the idea of karma, different attributes of karma. He talks about the chant and Buddhist philosophy in the context of our daily living. And our SGI community has a wonderful newspaper called World Tribune and a monthly magazine called Living Buddhism. And that is a combination of Buddhist study, but then again, the real world experiences of the members. And I think the balance of the two is always great. So again, as I shared at the beginning, I consider myself a lifelong learner and felt like I learned a lot in preparing for today and then hearing from you and learning from you. And I'm really, really grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you for listening. If you're interested in becoming a client and working with me, visit me at nunatherapy.com or follow me on social media at Nuna Therapy for regular content and inspiration. Until next time.